This week on the Home Network, we're renovating space. Infrastructure is taking big steps across the board with not one, but two in-orbit refueling architectures. Updates to ground and on-orbit propulsion, new players in space solar power and position navigation and timing, and shifts in the comms network.
If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a satellite, but not if you can't see it. SDA had a big week on the back of Andromeda's awards, with even more money arriving for space situational awareness companies from the private markets. Expect to see some of these players make moves in the adjacent space defense sector soon.
Orbital data centers are a flop. Terraflops, that is. The race to put computers in space is heating up as ODCs get announcements of many types this week, including new partnerships, new components, and new ways of scaling compute in space.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Space Times Podcast. As always, I'm Paul Mayer.
Here with Harrison Lambert.
Excited to share this week's space industry updates with you. We hope you enjoy the episode. Subscribe to our newsletter if you want the written breakdown of our episodes sent to your inbox every Monday morning. Drop us a comment on our LinkedIn or Blue Sky with anything you enjoyed or would like to see. And as always, listen weekly on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Substack, or wherever you're receiving this signal. This week on Space Times, the biggest trends that we're seeing pertain to the infrastructure necessary for on-orbit scaling and growth, some big changes and updates to the defense sector, and the continued growth and investment into the orbital data center market. Let's talk about some of the infrastructure updates that we've seen. First and foremost, OrbitFab announced their Raven and Nest products. So Raven is a fuel transport vehicle with roughly 50 kilogram capacity for transportable fuel. Nest is an orbital fuel depot, a fuel hub with several canisters, each able to support roughly 50 kilograms of propellant. In total, this is able to support 150 to 200 kilograms of on-orbit fuel, and this was revealed last week at Space Symposium.
Yeah, it's an interesting announcement to make. I mean, it signals that they're at a mature state, being able to deploy this kind of infrastructure. Most of what their work has been up till now is getting their Rafty port adopted by players in the industry, and they've gotten some great traction between the UK and the US, I guess just Europe in general. So there has been some traction there, but this is a big step towards getting something on orbit that's actually persistent and able to support multiple missions. I'm curious to see why, like, at what timeline this is on. They just launched a payload on Vigoride 7 on board Transporter 16 a couple of weeks ago, so it seems like a lot of the components for this are still under the validation phase. So I'd expect to see this on a couple of years timeline, in which case, they have some more time to get some more adoption. I think they would need a bit more, but given the fuel numbers here, it seems like they wouldn't be able to support huge swaths of orbit, so rather supporting popular orbits. So I would expect to see them partnering with a company that's launching constellations of satellites that could potentially benefit from extended lifetime through using this system.
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense. I know that the RPO requirements necessary for Raven to actually track and meet with their Rafty on a prospective client's payload that is a difficult technical challenge in and of itself. So I would certainly expect the timeline for this to provide end-to-end fueling to still be a good little while away, because OrbitFab hasn't really focused or done anything for RPO requirements yet. But I do think that it's notable that their strategy and their plan so far has been to achieve a certain level of saturation and a certain level of adoption in the market amongst potential customers before then building the capabilities to service those customers. So they've started with the demand side, making sure that the demand is actually there, and now they're incorporating the supply side as well.
Yeah, I think at the very least, it's a good signal. Like, they've been really good at pushing this part of the industry forward, and I think this is just another step in that process.
Yeah, and some of the work that OrbitFab has done in making refueling depots sort of a mainstay in conversation and making this industry a reality, we're seeing that benefit. We're seeing other companies benefit from some of that work as well. Dawn Aerospace announced their Loop network, which is a similar approach. It is a combination of transportation and refueling vehicles and fuel depots. They refer to the transportation vehicles as their SUV and the fueling depots as their OPD. but it's a similar approach with a similar sort of docking port that needs to be adopted. So it looks like the broader trend in the market is that multiple players are able to offer and provide a similar sort of end-to-end capability, or multiple folks are aiming at doing that. And sort of the key differentiator here is more or less boiling down to which adapter and which port you want to go with. So I know that the Rafty port has its own sort of mass and volume impact and its own mass and volume footprint. And the Loop network includes their own docking port with their own mass and volume footprint.
Yeah, I think Don recognized the same issue that Orbital has been addressing in their announcement for the Loop network. Basically, that this is a chicken and egg problem, that people want to use it, but they won't until it's available. So somebody has to kind of make the first move. I think for Don, it makes a lot more sense making this move. They've got 44 thrusters already on orbit. They sell them as a component. So they have these customer relationships with other satellite manufacturers that use their thrusters and could potentially benefit from this basically additional feature. What's interesting about their port is it's a monoprop. It's a nitrous oxide port. So it uses a single port rather than Rafty's two-port system, because it's pressurizing. So it's a bit simpler. It is a bit odd because it's not what their Hall thruster, their electric thrusters currently use. So maybe there's a new product in the works to go along with this Loop network. But I think it could potentially work into their lineup pretty well. It also works well with their Dawn space plane. That gives it the space plane's meant to be reusable. It's meant to fly and then deorbit and fly again. So allowing it to stay on orbit for longer could potentially increase the lifetime of this product and make it easier for them to develop it, since that's still in development and hasn't flown yet.
TerraSpark has raised over 5 million euros for space solar. The 5.4 million euro, 6.2 million US pre-seed raise is led by Daphne, Better Ventures, and the Hans Woman Group. TerraSpark was founded in 2025, and their vision is to effectively collect solar energy and transmit it back for terrestrial use. This is a mission and a vision that we've seen several times, but they're hitting the market right as the market needs this. So they're effectively viewed as an attempt to stand up sovereign energy capacity for European nations, because of a lot of the geopolitical challenges that Europe and the rest of the world are experiencing. A lot of Europe's energy supply has been impacted. So this is an attempt to try and provide some level of energy independence from some of the folks and players that Europe has always been dependent on, which is why they've raised, in my view, such a lucrative pre-seed raise, and why they've managed to do so in such short time, in less than a year of operations.
Yeah, it's a good signal for a growing industry. I really like this industry. I worked on Caltech Space Solar a couple of years ago, and at the time it was not as well adopted as it is now. But I think this brings the count up to 10 different companies working on it currently. And we just saw Mantis Space get a $10 million raise a couple of weeks ago. So there's definitely some money flowing into this sector. And TerraSpark's, kind of playing in the European markets. There's less competitors there. There's really like Space Solar, I think, is the only other one out of UK. I believe Volta Space is also out of there, but they're doing moon-based space solar power. So TerraSpark's probably competing against half of those competitors. The others are doing different flavors of this, space to space or space to moon. This seems poised for space to Earth. So really competing with the likes of Aetherflux or Overview Energy, somewhat competing against Reflect Orbital, but TerraSpark's taking the approach of gather energy and convert it to RF frequency and beam it down to the Earth that way, whereas Reflect is reflecting sunlight. Starcatcher's the other unique approach, using Fresnel lenses to focus sunlight. So definitely taking a more traditional approach here is probably a good approach for them, and just love to see more players in this sector, because I think it benefits Earth in a way I like to see out a lot of space applications.
VAST and Cedars-Sinai have partnered for drug discovery. So there was an announcement a week or so back out of NASA that NASA was reconsidering and sort of pivoting and changing its perspective on the commercial space station market. In large part, the takeaway was that NASA had, in so many words, acknowledged, the commercial and customer demand for a commercial space station really doesn't exist. So this is something that NASA and the US government will more or less just have to fund in part or largely in order for this to be successful. So we're going to pivot from trying to make this commercial market realize and trying to get these companies to develop to more of a continuation of the ISS, wanting to keep the ISS around and keep funding that to extend the operating and survivable life of the ISS, which for the most part aligns with exactly what we've been saying for since jump, basically. But we've been saying, I've been saying for months now that the commercial space station market simply does not have the demand to stand on its own 2 feet. So it will always need some form of government subsidy and some form of government investment. So it's good to see that NASA caught up to that. But VAST and Cedars-Sinai have announced this partnership. So VAST Haven 1 will host Cedars-Sinai's experiment from the Cedars-Sinai Center for Space Medicine Research in the exobiosphere in 2027. So it's good to see that despite the customer demand being somewhat limited, that VAST is still able to develop these partnerships and get folks working and get folks committed to working on their product and on their habitats.
Yeah, I think that NASA announcement was so funny because NASA was basically like, we don't want to keep funding these commercial space stations because there's no business case. And then Axiom and then I think VAST kind of hit back with like, no, there's a business case. You guys pay us for it. Which is like this circular argument of like, well, they don't want to pay you for it anymore. So where's the business case? So the way they phrase this partnership is kind of interesting because Cedars-Sinai has been working with them on like health of astronauts, which is more of a service to VAST. So it looks like that like Cedars might be getting something back out of this, which is playing on the in-orbit manufacturing side of things. So potentially a product that VAST could sell and play in that sector, which is supposed to be a huge sector. It's just taking a long time to manifest. But having this sort of partnership is good. I think it's a bit odd because VAST is the only commercial space station that's supposed to have artificial gravity, which kind of defeats the purpose of in-orbit manufacturing. But I've heard that they have a section of their habitat that is not spun up, so they can do microgravity research there as well. And I think it just plays into the broader theme that we're seeing from them recently, which is a maturation of their entire kind of ecosystem of on-orbit living, which is they just had announced their VAST spacesuit this week, and having this partnership with a health company to make sure that their astronauts are healthy is good forward messaging that they're thinking through all the details of having people living in space.
Rhea Space has raised roughly $6 million US for deep space optical position, navigation, and timing solutions. The Washington-based startup has closed a $6 million Series A round, which for a space company is a really small Series A round, but Rhea Space isn't much of a hardware manufacturer or hardware provider themselves. They're more of an effectively a tech lab, which means that they're able to run much more capitally efficient here. But what they're doing is basically providing position, navigation, and timing solutions via visual geolocating rather than GNSS or GPS satellite data. So rather than needing to talk to a GPS satellite and figure out where you are by receiving a signal on your phone, they're effectively looking around, seeing the Dolomite Mountains, looking at the stars, and able to identify on the map and triangulate their position relative to geographic indicators and celestial indicators as well. There have been a couple of companies that have been playing in this space, doing so with optical navigation. And it's good to see that there is another one doing so specifically for space and orbital assets. The big sort of challenge is that doing so in that layer, doing so at that altitude means that you are sort of beholden and dependent on the same things that any and all other sort of optical signals are. So there's some challenges that need to be overcome if you're trying to navigate or locate by looking at mountain ranges, for example, and it's a cloudy day, or you're in an orbit or a layer of atmosphere that is that creates some form of interference for your optical signal. There's going to be some challenges there, but these are the problems that they're looking at solving.
Yeah, it's an interesting offering. And this isn't totally new. We've used star trackers in the past to do geolocation capabilities, but typically the accuracy is not great and the drift is not good enough to provide persistent navigation messages. So there's still a heavy reliance on GPS. So if they find some way to solve this, it could be really valuable. Removing a GPS signal is not just useful for GPS denied environments, but it could reduce the load on the GNC systems of spacecraft. Traditionally, the star trackers are looking for stars that pass across the Earth's limb, judging it against a stationary object like the Earth when you're moving through space and reorienting and all of that is kind of the way to go. But I could see them going with dedicated satellites that are capable of staying at a specific attitude and using the stars purely for translational motion and then communicating that out to other satellites that are plugged into their network. I'm not sure exactly how their solution works, but it'll be interesting to see what they come up with and how well it's adopted.
Boeing and Millennium have teamed up to develop a new micro geo bus. So Boeing makes and builds their own satellites. Generally speaking, those satellites are really massive, big, power intensive, power hungry. Typically, 4 kilowatts is on the low end. Their stated range is 4 kilowatts to 30 kilowatts, but they also have product offerings that consume and demand more power than that. So they're able to go higher than 30 kilowatts on the Boeing side, whereas Millennium Space is on the much lower end of things. The 1 kilowatt is sort of the upper end of their power consumption and their product offerings. So the partnership here between Boeing and their child company Millennium is to sort of bridge that gap between the sort of 5 kilowatt range that Boeing bottoms out at and the 1 kilowatt range that Millennium Space tops off at. So Boeing's expertise largely comes with the big power intensive heavy duty payloads that they specialize in, whereas Millennium Space is more focused on sort of speed and agility, both in the manufacturing side and on orbit. So they're excited to offer this new this new class of satellite, the Resolute satellite class. It's going to be in that sort of 1 to 5 kilowatt range and aims to leverage sort of the agile manufacturing and a little bit more orbital agility than maybe some of the bigger things that Boeing works on for their new product offerings.
Yeah, I'm surprised it took Boeing so long to take a hint. Like their Geocom satellites are not selling. Last year we saw a dozen sales for Geocom, and over half of them were for micro geo. So that's companies like Astranis, Ascendarc, Swiss 12. Those are companies playing purely in that space, and they're eating the lunch of these big Geocom providers. Like this year, I think the only one that sold so far is Northrop Grumman's QGeo to Hungary last week. Whereas MicroGeo sold like 5 different satellites. So it was like OmanSat for Astranis. Ascendarc sold a couple to SLI. We were speculating Swiss Total has six in the pipeline since they bought some thrusters from OHB Sweden. So MicroGeo seems to be coming in hot, and traditional Geocom satellites are having to adapt. So it's great Boeing can pull on Millennium's heritage of building smaller satellites, and this seems like a great way to kind of leverage both sides of their company to bring out a new product offering.
So Rocket Lab has done more than just acquire Mynaric officially. They have also released their Gauss electric thruster to the broader market. So the Gauss thruster is broadly speaking, it's a Hall effect thruster, fairly standard. But the big innovation, the big value add that they're bringing to bear here is that this is designed ground up for high volume manufacturing. So they're targeting and able to hit about 200 units annually, which really highlights and underscores the need for this type of on-orbit propulsion, which they've been working on for a good little while now.
Yeah, this is the kind of numbers we need to start seeing out of propulsion manufacturers. Like we just said, Dawn has 44, which is already impressive. Like earlier this year, we saw Astro announce that they did 100 thrusters last year. So the numbers keep climbing as the number of satellites launched keeps going up. And I think, the timing is a bit conspicuous as York just acquired Orbital Space. So it seems like Rocket Lab's response to that, as York and Rocket Lab have been kind of going back and forth on competing over like PWSA contracts over certain component suppliers. So Rocket Lab seemingly is. I mean, they must have been working on this for a while, but to announce it at this time is interesting. Kind of takes the wind out of the sails for York, to a certain extent. But it's certainly a component that's needed for many space manufacturers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting to see Rocket Lab, whose strategy has, for the most part, been to buy rather than build. It's interesting to see them focus on building this electrical propulsion capability. Granted, they've been working in the space for a while, so it makes sense that this falls more closely to their core product offerings than maybe the optical terminal sector or some of the, or solar power or some of the other sections that they've looked at sort of partnering or just buying the capabilities for outright. Similarly to York Space, I mean, they acquired their own thruster capabilities from Orbion, if memory serves, and they've been developing their own capabilities in house as well. Though we haven't seen a sort of comparable announcement out of York Space for what they've specifically been focused on and what they've specifically been specialized in. But I would not at all be surprised to see this sort of arms race of capability continue between the two companies, because to your point, they are the most direct of competitors for these PWSA contracts and Golden Dome and defense contracts that we've seen. In an announcement that brings a chagrin smile to my eye, Seagate Space and Oceaneering have partnered together to provide the much anticipated successor to the Sea Launch system from back in the 90s. We've gone without spending billions of dollars on a sea-based system for little to no return on that investment far too long. So it's great to see that the private market is stepping in to help fill that gap. Seagate Space was founded back in 2025. And their partnership with Oceaneering is to build out their gateway platform for customers and clients targeting launches as early as 2027.
Yeah, it's great to see, because we've been watching the slow progress of terrestrial launch bases over the years. There's very few active launch bases in the U.S. that can keep up with the demand for launch cadence. I know Blue Origin just got clearance to launch out of Vandenberg, and that was a years-long effort. So adding capability like on the ocean where there's less regulation, it's easier to launch, maybe not easier to get your stuff there, would be a welcome expansion. And ultimately, it's something that we have to build to compete with China. They've been using the LOC consistently and at a much higher scale than we've ever done with Sea Launch. And so having that capability can help us keep up with their launch cadence as they ramp up their launch vehicle arsenal.
AST has launched Bluebird 7 on the New Glenn 3. This is part of AST Space Mobile's direct-to-device constellation, the Bluebird platform that we've been talking about basically since we started. Launch was successful. However, Bluebird 7 is not in the right orbit. So we don't yet know what the implications of this are, but Blue Origin announced that the launch was successful, but that Bluebird 7 has been placed in a, quote, off-nominal orbit by New Glenn 3. Why this launch wound up deploying Bluebird 7 into the incorrect orbit is unclear. What the implications of that for Bluebird 7's operations and success as a vehicle are unclear, and what the implications are for future launches from New Glenn 3, whether this was a hardware mishap or a flight software mishap. What this means for future launches of New Glenn is also unclear.
Yeah, this really sucks to see. I mean, it was great. Like when they say launch success, that seems to be doing its first stage success. The booster managed to launch and land, which is good for Blue Origin. It's a reuse of a booster, but their second stage failed to relight and insert the payload into orbit, which I would consider a launch failure. I think the FAA is certainly going to consider a launch failure because this will trigger a pause for assessment. which I know Blue Origin's going to hate to see, since they're already behind on their launch cadence and they need this vehicle online to launch their Amazon Leo constellation. So this is a huge setback for them. It's unfortunate. It's also a huge setback for AST Space Mobile. They launched their first tranche on a Indian GMSV launch vehicle late last year, and that was very successful. It was the heaviest launch for India. So, and that constellation's up and running, doing great. They got a big contract for TAC-SATCOM last month. So AST is like in a pretty good place, if ever, to have a launch failure, but it really sucks. It's just their second tranche because it inserted them into a perigee of 150 kilometers. So, AST Space Mobile is now a VLEO platform. Unwillingly a VLEO platform. They haven't made it clear yet whether they'll be able to raise their orbit from there, but it's not designed to climb 400 kilometers and then have any sort of meaningful lifetime. They're carrying enough fuel to keep their satellites in orbit for the lifetime to keep, but that much drag at that low of an orbit, like in order to get their thrusters firing, they're going to have to deploy their giant solar panel, which is like the whole point of like the Bluebird, is that it has this large panel that doubles as a solar array and a phased array. So deploying that to get enough power to trigger their thrusters is going to increase their drag profile significantly. And I just don't see how their thrusters are going to be able to overcome that. So I hope to hear good news, but I'm taking this as a sad day for both AST and Blue Origin.
Yeah, rough day at the office, but hey, at least neither the launch vehicle nor the satellite represent security threats.
Well, if they did, we have plenty of defense players coming to the aid to help out there. And this week, there's been a huge kind of boom in space defense and space domain awareness off the back of the Andromeda announcement last week that awarded $1.8 billion to space-based space situational awareness. We actually have a few more news coming out of the private sector in this vein. North Star Space announced that they're going to SPAC this week, going through a public shell company that's going to buy them to bring them public. This is a Canadian space company. They have a couple different offerings. One is the Earth-based or their Earth intelligence platform, so Earth observation insights. The probably more interesting one for this week is their space domain awareness offering. So they have some space-based assets that can do observation of other satellites and do constant tracking of those assets. They've launched satellites in the past on board Spire satellites, so they've been operating this constellation already. So this isn't like a SPAC right out the gate. They've been around for a little while. It is interesting that a Canadian company is going public. I think it's going public on the American Stock Exchange. So hopefully that brings them some funding to expand their space situational awareness offerings, as I'm sure the demand across the sea in Europe and up north in Canada will be just as strong as we've seen with the US.
So SPACs typically trail, or IPOs are typically sort of a leading indicator for SPACs. If it's a good IPO market, you're going to see people try to SPAC their way into liquidity. And one of the trends and things that we've definitely seen over the past year has been a market uptick in liquidation events and the sort of appetite and opportunity for such liquidation events. So it makes sense that North Star is trying to sort of hit the market while it's hot. Though traditionally SPACs have usually been, well, an IPO is a much more rigorous process than a SPAC. So SPACs themselves aren't inherently problematic, but SPACs provide more opportunity for sort of overvaluation. Companies that aren't necessarily at the stage or at the level of maturity that an IPO would require, or that their sort of actual public offering or liquidation event would require, are able to sort of achieve. So it's not, all SPACs aren't inherently bad. It's not necessarily a bad sign. At this stage, it's a good sign, but it's something to keep an eye on, that seeing an explosion of SPACs can lead to the market effectively being a little bit overly frothy and folks sort of overpaying just on hype.
Also, for space situational awareness, we have Citrus Space, which is not so much playing in the space situational awareness as much as the object classification sector of space. So some technology has some crossovers, but this is more for like near field operations. So it's once a satellite gets close to an object, they're able to classify it in terms of what it's made of, what it's shaped like, how it's spinning. This is really useful for things like rendezvous proximity operations. They raised a 15 million Series A, so it's pretty sizable for their tech, which seems to signal that it's relatively advanced, but I haven't seen them launch anything yet. It will become more critical as a lot of these companies are building out the RPO capabilities, as we're seeing a huge boom in that space since last year. So great to see another player there. I think we've seen companies like Aerodrive recently. So there seems to be quite a few small companies kind of building out this technology from the ground up, seeming to offer it as a product to other companies. Maybe it's something like we've seen with Starfish Space partnering with Impulse Mira to provide approach capability there. Similarly, Turion Space has raised 75 million. So not similar in price tag, it's significantly higher. But this is interesting for Turion because they just got awarded under the Andromeda contract last week, part of the $1.8 billion contract there. So great month for Turion. This is a really great signal that their capability is well respected by the defense industry. I'm figuring that a lot of the 75 million will go towards expanding that towards the commercial industry. They have a couple different product offerings. One is the space situational awareness imaging kind of capability, but the other is their droid spacecraft, which I haven't seen anything awarded for that in particular, but it does play hand in hand with the space situational awareness, and it does play into the bigger trend we're seeing with space domain awareness, tying into the growing space defense sector, which is more active satellites going out, interacting with other satellites, interacting with adversarial satellites, either for observation, investigation, or deorbiting or moving them around. So they've got a couple different droid platforms. It seems like they'll be developing out that use case to plug into their system as they build along with Andromeda and potentially advance that RPO sector.
Yeah, Turion has been a company that's been growing and executing incredibly well. They've gone from, I want to say, order of magnitude a dozen people about 2 years ago to now over 200 strong. So they've been executing on all of their capabilities as they've continued to fundraise and scale incredibly efficiently. So great job by Ryan and the team over there. They've been doing everything that they need to do in order to hit some of their deliverables. And I believe they're expecting to see some either demonstration or first capability deliverables going up later this year themselves. So great month, great year for Turion so far. Excited to keep following them.
Yeah, I love to see startups playing in new spaces and kind of pushing the state of the art forward. But we've also got some big players in this space as well, as MDA Space just announced their Midnight platform. This will be leveraging their Aurora bus, which is used for communications constellations and other modular spacecraft designs, as it is their modular bus platform. But they're equipping it with their Skymaker, which is a robotic arm that allows Midnight to do RPO. It goes up, grabs other satellites, either for friendly or adversarial purposes. And this is leveraging their vast robotics experience. They're the ones that developed the candidate arm that's been flying on the ISS now successfully for a few decades. I know when we were at SSL, we were working with them closely on their robotics lab to develop the Restore L and Spider programs. So that was servicing of NASA satellites, which haven't launched. I think they've got mothballed, but it looks like the technology is now getting put to new use and a in-demand use at that.
So there's several sort of models here, but fundamentally there's the RPO missions that amount to orbital transfer vehicles and refueling operations, which in one way or another all involve more or less a port. They involve some sort of port or docking mechanism. And then there's the RPO model and the orbital services model, where, hey, you don't need the port. We're able to just sort of work with you with robotic arm. And there have been some companies, some of which come from Blue Origin graduates, some of which come from other like SpaceX graduates, other space and robotics powerhouses that have been looking at developing the capabilities of the robotic arm to exceed those of just a grabber or a claw machine at the carnival. So it'll be interesting to see what sort of capabilities the robotics are able to actually offer, whether you're going to try and put sort of a welder or a sintering or cutting tool on there for either refueling or repair purposes, or for potentially unwanted repair purposes, like, oh, you got your power all backwards. We got to, would you look at that? We got this all sorted for you. So it'll be interesting to see which way this winds up playing, but additional robotics and seeing MDA get Skymaker on orbit is a net positive for the industry for sure.
Yeah, and like North Star, they're a Canadian company, so a lot of money flowing into Canadian space industry as well to build out, parallel capabilities to the U.S. On the U.S. side, though, we have Starfighter Space partnering with Blackstar for hypersonics testing. So Starfighter Space is a company we talked about a couple months ago when they IPO'd, basically coming out of stealth straight into an IPO, doing air-launched rockets for space insertion. So I think they have a fleet of like 11 F-104 planes that they equip with these rockets to launch small sats into orbit. Blackstar is an interesting partner for that, as their product is mostly a space plane. So a bit large for that kind of launch, but I'm guessing it's more for testing out certain capabilities. And there's stated purposes for hypersonic testing, which is a pattern we've been seeing a lot with these kind of companies, with launch vehicle companies, with terrestrial companies, hitting on that hypersonic market, because there's a lot of money to be had there, even though it's primarily for missile testing capabilities. There could be some dual purpose use for Blackstar as their orbital drone, as they're calling it. Is supposed to be hypersonic, allowing it to move around in space, more agile, and re-enter and be reused for rapid response space applications.
Yeah, the hypersonic sort of like hypersonic, I'll say like glider or like orbital vehicle is something that is sort of in demand. Like in my mind, it's weird to call something that's not in the atmosphere hypersonic. Or that's sort of like skipping on the, like it's weird for me to wrap my head around there, because
no one can hear you scream in space,
right? Like the speed of sound in space is zero. It's just weird.
So if they don't move at all, they're
right. Mach infinite. I just anyways, but the point is that there's capabilities of being able to get sort of vehicles in orbit and then have them re-enter after orbit, effectively sort of floating or staying on or just sort of above the atmosphere a little bit. And so like there's definitely some overlap here. I think that the partnership between Starfighters and Blackstar is a little bit interesting, though Blackstar I know is more about to my knowledge, Blackstar is more focused about sort of down mass rather than up mass, though that's not explicitly what they're doing. But I know that they're more focused about sort of getting up there and then staying on orbit, whereas Starfighters is focused on getting stuff up to orbit and staying up there. So there's definitely going to be some hypersonic overlap between what the two teams are working on. So it should be interesting to see how that plays out, given that they're both presumably coming at this from different ends of the sandwich.
On the ground-based communication side of things, Kymeta won a 3-year Office of Naval Research contract for their mobile communications terminals. We interviewed Kymeta a few weeks ago at SAT Show, where they announced their Kestrel U5 mobile terminal, which is really cool technology. It allows for a mobile up and down link through the Ka/Ku band, which is really useful. And I think one of the main applications they were talking about was boat mounted terminals. So their terminals are meant to be mobile in the truest sense, to move around. They obviously have terrestrial applications, but they seemed very proud of the fact that they could mount on boats, which is one of the more difficult use cases for these kind of things. So it looks like the Navy has taken notice and is looking into using that as part of their offerings for communication capabilities for maritime communications. So a pretty big announcement out of the U.S. government this week was that the DoD is planning to restructure a few of their agencies and how they procure space assets. So the Space Defense Agency, the Space Systems Command, and the Space Rapid Capabilities Office are all intended to be restructured to be under the DoD and not separate entities. These have all kind of worked in tandem with the Space Force, but they've been focused on particular capabilities. So Space Defense Agency is probably the one we talk about the most, as they're the ones behind the PWSA and responsible for a lot of the transport layers, so military tactical communications. But all these agencies work on different aspects of space acquisitions. The goal of restructuring them is to more so structure them under programs rather than under departments. They think this will streamline the acquisition process, get more money into the hands of companies, and ultimately decrease the amount of bloat. The redundancy of different offices operating independently can then be consolidated under the DoD, and they can acquire everything needed for the Space Force under one roof.
Yeah, there's a lot of reason to think that this will help streamline the acquisitions and appropriations process for DoD. The fact that these very similar overlapping agencies have all, for the most part, been siloed traditionally. There have been a lot of efforts over the past 5 to 10 years to create a lot more inter-office collaboration and to sort of break down some of those silos so that there is more coordination amongst them. But this reorganization looks like a very explicit effort to try and deploy a whole bunch of capital directly to these needs and get as much capability in the defense in the DoD's sort of tool belt as possible. I think we're expecting to see DoD, Space Force, Air Force, et cetera. I think we're expecting to see funding for those efforts and for those departments basically double, somewhere between 50% and 100% increase over the next year. So there's a decided effort and focus on ensuring that capital gets deployed as quickly and as effectively as possible.
And perhaps an ideal model of acquiring capabilities, the orbital data center market is having a big week this week. Orbital data centers are pretty much a brand new sector at this point. They've been touted for the past few months as a replacement for terrestrial data centers, and there's every player in the space seems to be hopping in on it in some way or another. This week, we're seeing Aethero announce their acquisition of Titan satellites from EnduroSat. This is interesting in that Aethero develops rad-hardened compute based off of NVIDIA's Blackwell computer. And this particular partnership, they're touting 16,000 teraflops of capability on board one Titan satellite, which is enough to do every level of inference training that you should need from a data center on orbit. And it's a great win for EnduroSat. They've been doing very well recently. We've talked the past few weeks about their Airmo contract. They got a contract for SAR, European SAR with metasensing. Basically just a bunch of purchases that are, reinforcing the fact that their modular spacecraft development platform is working and is, a great offering. For this case, the Titan satellite is a 3.2 kilowatt satellite, so very large. It will be impressive to see that if their modular platform can scale to this size, because you get a lot of GNC and power scaling problems at this scale. But it would be great if this is an offering that EnduroSat has, because it, like I said, it's a modular platform, so it should allow them to plug in for any compute platform, not just Aethero's. But this is a great demonstration of that capability, and once it comes to pass.
Yeah, I think the fact that they're sort of starting here with what is currently a high power satellite, 3.2 kilowatts, is sort of maybe offset by some of the new satellite buses that we've seen being developed, presumably for ODC purposes, with 10 kilowatts being sort of like a new metric that we've seen come out. We've also seen folks promising as high as 100 kilowatts of power. So it'll be interesting to see how they're able to scale fundamentally the thermal challenge, the thermal needs, and solve the thermal challenges that they need to solve at this scale, and see how that's able to keep up with the increased power needs as these orbital data centers get even bigger and more power hungry, more intense. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that plays out. I mean, one of the big question marks surrounding orbital data centers is whether or not the use case closes given the cooling challenges, given the sheer amount of heat that's generated, the sheer amount of heat that you need to dissipate and get rid of. So it'll be interesting to see how that sort of bottleneck, that technical bottleneck, gets solved.
Yeah, 3.2 kilowatts, it's definitely a challenge, but I don't think they're looking at the same scale of difficulty as somebody like Starlink, who's talking about 100 kilowatt satellites. And, we've seen higher power satellites launch, like K2 Space just launched a 20 kilowatt satellite. And from all their announcements, it looks like it's going great on orbit. So definitely a problem that can be solved. But once you start getting up into the tens of kilowatts, it's definitely a difficult challenge, which is why it was surprising to see this week that Take Me to Space raised $55 million to develop their 50 kilowatt bus for orbital data centers. Take Me to Space is a Indian space AI company. Well, all the announcements I've seen coming out of them are partnerships with AI companies like Little Place Labs. They announced they're deploying the Orbit 5 to their satellites. I think a satellite had mentioned something about them too. So these are AI at the edge kind of applications where they're able to use AI applications to get more information out of the data collected on orbit, which plays more into the catalog of offerings that Take Me to Space has. They do have hardware. They actually sell a lot of their components online and sell full satellites, but all of them are for small satellites. So CubeSat size, I think the highest I saw was like 32U, which 32U is not going to get you 50 kilowatts. So to get to 50 kilowatts, they're going to build a significantly different satellite. Honestly, I think 55 million might not actually be enough to get them there. But I'm hoping them the best. It is an expansion upon their current offering. But it would be, beneficial to a lot of the customers they already have signed.
Yeah, so Take Me to Space raised 5 million and change back in January of 26, and that raise was predicated around their ability to deliver and provide CubeSat level solutions. To your point, up to 32U. The raise that they're targeting, like you said, 55 million, is to go into an entirely different category and class of asset. So it's a massive undertaking. It's a very ambitious goal. I wish them well, but I would also, as an investor, I would also share some concerns about being able to go from the CubeSat size, from the CubeSat asset class to the type of asset class for LEO or MEO that's needed to be able to support that much power right off the bat. So a big swing, and hopefully they're able to close the raise well and keep making progress.
For a more established company breaking into the ODC market, well, not quite breaking in. Kepler has announced that they're going to fly Sophia's compute tiles. I say not quite breaking in because their first tranche of satellites launched earlier this year actually had 2 Axiom Space orbital data centers on board. Those are hosted payloads, so they were more just units that had compute capability on board and just shared power with the Kepler bus and benefited from the laser interconnect link that they had between all 10 Kepler satellites and the ground, which is a really unique offering currently on orbit. So it looks like they're expanding upon that experience by adding some more players into the mix. They've been talking about doing more hosted payloads. They partnered with Kongsberg Nano Avionics a few months ago to do hosted payload integration for Europe, but Sophia Space is an American company, so it looks like they're also getting some traction here as well. It's a really unique approach to this, as the tile component that comes out of Sophia actually replaces the solar array for a satellite and embeds the compute into that solar array. So it's kind of a significant architectural change for Kepler rather than just placing a box on their payload deck. Great to see. I think they'll benefit greatly from that laser intersatellite connect, as that's one of the key components needed for orbital data centers.
Yeah, Sophia Space is a really interesting company. We got the chance to look at them a while ago as a potential investment, and they had been building this sort of flat sat technology of the solar panel with a compute layer and then radiation layer and effectively cooling layer. They'd already been working on this since, I want to say, 2023, maybe 2024. So they've been working on this for a little while. sort of developing the technology. So their technology is already more mature than most of the other orbital data center technologies, just because they've been building for this basically since before the AI boom. So their technology, very interesting. And to your point, they're not a hosted payload. They're a substitute product for one's solar panels. So well, maybe not. That's not the right way to describe it, because they're meant to be self-sufficient. So they're not actually powering your satellite, but you deploy an additional sort of solar array of these Sophia tiles, and they function as their own tech stack effectively. But regardless, it's I guess you could still refer to that as a hosted payload, but it's a hosted payload as part of your solar array, which is very different than hosting a payload on the bus itself. But great to see that Sophia is making progress and that Kepler is flying with them, and excited to see how this works out for both parties.
Yeah, and then other news for Kepler, they're also awarded a $30.1 million contract to be the prime contractor for the Hydron Consortium. So this is a ESA consortium to develop laser inter-satellite communication. It's kind of paired with the Skylight Consortium, both intended to build out this capability for Europe. They, as a prime contractor, they're going to work with other companies in that consortium to develop out their capabilities. I know we interviewed one of them last week. Azora Space was working on the space to ground connection. So this is likely good news for Kepler and Azora, as space to ground, like I said, is one of the key differentiators for Kepler. There's a few other companies I worked on, like Open Cosmos, said that they can do it as well, but it is one of the more emerging aspects of a already very cutting edge technology for space. So this is great for Kepler. I think it's great for everybody else in the consortium. I think it's great for Europe, as they've been having close ties. Another Canadian company working closely with Europe to develop this capability that they're putting a lot of money behind. On that space to ground communications side of things, Archangel Lightworks has raised a $13.5 million Series A. This is to develop their mobile ground laser communication terminals. So much like Azora Space, this company is developing a module that can move around on the ground and communicate with satellites using laser communications. So they beam a laser up and back and are able to get 10 gigabits per second data rate, which is about 100 times faster than traditional radio frequency communications. Again, I think this serves the emerging market of laser intersatellite communications very well. It also helps with the ground station sector of the industry that's been experiencing a kind of a bottleneck for space architectures for the past few years. There's quite a few companies that are getting a lot of money and moving very fast to try to grow out the ground station network. But there's just limits with terrestrial regulations and FCC spectrum rights licensing and just physics of RF frequencies limiting how much that can be addressed. So seeing more players tackling the space to ground laser communications challenge is great to see. On the ground to ground side of things, which we typically don't cover because no space in the loop there, Terra has expanded their offering to include video distribution. So Terra is a ground to ground laser communications system. They've been deploying mainly in Brazil, but around the world, deploying this technology to enable telecom communications across large distances. I think they can go up to 20 miles per beam hop. So they're basically replacing traditional RF towers to get higher throughput, which the video distribution has a great signal that they're able to get large amounts of data through the atmosphere. But what made me include them this week is that they announced their intention to expand into the ODC market. I guess they're seeing the dollar signs there and thinking it's worth their effort to figure out how to get that to work, which for them, it's basically just pointing their units skyward. It's a bit further than 20 miles to get to space, but they have some great technology behind them. They're developed out of Google. They're a spin-off company. They just a few months ago announced their photonic chip, which is like the smallest laser chip I've ever seen. So they've got some great tech, and if they can expand into this problem, I think it's a great company to have tackling the issue of space to ground optical communications. On the marketplace side of things for orbital data centers, Atomic 6 announced their ODC.space marketplace. We reported on this earlier this week as Atomic 6 let us know on the good news ahead of time that they're creating a marketplace to make it easy for anybody to buy orbital data centers. So this is basically they have three standard options with price, very transparent pricing that basically allows anybody to buy an orbital data center or co-host space on an orbital data center. The intention here is to allow Atomic 6 to handle the procurement and the engineering behind building and deploying these capabilities and making it very simple for the end user to just acquire this capacity. It kind of solves a problem we've been seeing on the Earth, which is AI companies need more data centers, and there's just this disparate market for supplying them. The construction companies that get stood up to build them only handle a few of the contract, and they're kind of spread out because no one company is scaled to a size that can handle the full load. And that means that each one is kind of learning on their own timeline, getting things deployed at their own timeline, going through all the terrestrial regulatory hoops. And this kind of challenge is what's pushed a lot of the data center demand to space. There's less regulatory constraints. Right. There's more free power. That immediately makes it easier in a lot of senses to put a data center in space, but it's still space. It's still complicated. It still makes it a headache for AI companies that know nothing about space to try to operate in that domain. So this is trying to take away a lot of that difficulty and abstract it to a simplified layer that any company can use, which is a trend we love to see in space, where space kind of gets simplified so that anybody can access it and not just people that are well trained in it.
It's very much a problem that needs to be solved. The fact that there isn't an existing marketplace for this level of need, for this level of demand. There have been a multitude of different companies that have tried to create similar marketplaces for different layers, for data insights, for different types of assets, for fleet orchestration and fleet management. There have been a multitude of different players who have tried to create marketplaces. Creating a successful marketplace is always difficult because it basically amounts to a standards war that, if you have one marketplace and another marketplace, the two very rarely interact, the two very rarely get involved with one another. And so you tend to sort of fragment the market, and it winds up being more of a winner take all scenario, which is always difficult to make a successful winner take all product. So it's interesting to see this sort of happen. The big sort of question that I would ask for Atomic 6's orbital data center marketplace that they're building out is with whom effectively they're partnering to show the assets that they're actually selling and providing. How much of that Atomic 6 is looking at doing in-house, how much of that they're looking at providing through some of their partners, and whether Atomic 6 wants to just be effectively sort of the market maker and the matchmaker, or whether Atomic 6 wants to own as much of that tech stack as they can. Their Lightwing and their what's their shield technology called? Their armor, space armor.
Yeah. They also have Hot Wing now.
Hot Wing.
Yeah, it's their radiator, deployable radiator.
Well, so their Lightwing, space armor, and now deployable radiator, Hot Wing, all represent sort of different potential layers of solution for the orbital data center market. They don't necessarily have any compute yet. They don't necessarily have the actual solar technology themselves, but they're able to develop the solar arrays. They're able to develop the radiator technology. So they could very well find themselves positioned as a sort of the systems engineering level integrator for all of the different components that need to go into the ODC marketplace that they're developing. But it'll just be interesting to see how they plan to sort of tackle that as time goes on.
AST just announced they're deorbiting their satellites.
Oh, no. So as you said, a very rough day at the office for everyone involved.
Well, they said they have Bluebird 8 ready for launch in 30 days, so hopefully not too much of a setback. Lastly, for ODCs, we have Lone Star announcing their Star Vault product. This is right in line with what they do. They're an orbital data center in the truest sense. They store data on orbit rather than just do AI on orbit. So they're addressing, cold storage, data storage, large volumes of storage data that needs to be protected and separate from physical terrestrial networks for protection purposes. They've launched a couple data centers to the moon on board IM-1 and IM-2, so intuitive machine landers in the past. And unfortunately, both those landers didn't succeed in their landing, but at least one of them was able to confirm their product was working. So they technically have flight heritage. Since then, they've partnered with Sidus Space to fly orbital data centers around the moon. And so this StarVault offering is kind of an expansion upon that partnership. It's an official productization of that offering. If you buy StarVault, you're able to lock away your data on board their data centers that fly on Sidus Space's satellites, either around the moon, or it looks like they're also expanding into low Earth orbit.
So on to the business moves for this week, and boy, are there a lot of them. We're going to have to move quickly here, but first and foremost, Amazon has formally acquired Globalstar for $11.5 billion. So this acquisition is massive. We spoke about Globalstar looking to sell for about $9 billion late last year. So Amazon wound up closing the deal. They managed to get the three-way negotiation between Globalstar and Apple to close, and it only cost them a $2.5 billion premium, which may sound a little bit sardonic from me, but that's actually a very meaningful accomplishment. That their total premium they had to pay was less than 30%. So this partnership with Apple now enables LEO to provide direct-to-device solutions and to power some of, not power as in provide the battery power, but powered as in to provide the direct-to-device functionality for a bevy of Apple products moving forward in their next generation of LEO satellites. And effectively, this represents Bezos very consciously going toe-to-toe with Musk. Musk acquired EchoStar last year for, I believe, $17 billion, half of which was in equity. So Amazon is now acquiring Globalstar so that they're able to compete on the D2D front. Amazon has directly partnered with Apple, even though there was speculation last year that SpaceX would be trying to do so as they entered the direct-to-device market and as they entered that space. And combined between Amazon Leo and Blue Origin, you can see that Amazon and Blue Origin, Bezos' companies, are effectively trying to replicate and compete directly with the entirety of SpaceX's value chain.
Yeah, this story is crazy to me on so many levels. Just from a financial standpoint, it's kind of wild. Globalstar was formed back in 1990s as a consortium between Loral. So even before we were there, even before Space Systems Loral, it was just Loral. Formed this consortium with Loral, Alenia, and Qualcomm to do direct-to-device communications, but like satellite phones, like dedicated satellite phones.
Right.
They were way early on the market, like decades early.
Just a bit.
I love the gumption, but they totally missed the mark and then went bankrupt in early 2000. Even through that, they are still publicly traded companies. So they kind of bounced back, and in the late 2010s, early 2020s, they actually formed their partnership with Apple. So they acquired their N53 S-band spectrum, which allows them to operate in that low frequency S-band, which enables them to operate on smaller form factor receiver transceivers, which is why Qualcomm was able to leverage that to build out their modem chipset that was later integrated into Apple's iPhone 14, enabling the SOS communication service for Apple. In 2022, Apple then invested $1.5 billion into Globalstar, making them a 20% stakeholder, which is why they had such a huge influence over the actual closing of this sale, and probably why the price got jacked up, because Apple wasn't very keen on Amazon owning a portion of the tech stack that Apple iPhones now rely pretty heavily on. So that 20%, I think, got them, $1.5 billion. Now that's up to $2.5 billion. So cool, $1 billion earned. They're still going to get the service they need out of Amazon through those Globalstar satellites. Although now Amazon Leo is able to use that N53 S-band on their Leo satellites as well. So from a technical standpoint, this is very interesting because it's a deviation away from what Leo traditionally does. They usually use Ka band for high throughput broadband service, and they've been mainly touting LEO as kind of a business offering to tie companies into AWS, create kind of internet connections through space for that service. But now this adds a direct-to-device component with a huge contract with Apple, which is honestly bigger than any contract SpaceX has, any single contract in total. So Starlink's still well in the lead. But it really does put them head to head in this direct to device arena that they hadn't really been explicitly competing in with LEO. I think it's an interesting pivot given the timing that they still need to launch 1,000 LEO satellites by July in order to not lose their Ka-band spectrum license that they need for internet backhaul. The FCC doesn't seem to be playing ball. They're likely going to lose that license. They've already got 300 satellites up in orbit with hundreds more going up every month. So this could potentially save their constellation in terms of not being a total write-off if they can't operate them in their designated spectrum and instead pivot to becoming a direct-to-device player. I think it's a lot more challenging in terms of who they're competing with. Like AST Space Mobile is another one that's doing direct device, and they're honestly have better capability at this point as well. So a big challenge, but I think I don't want to say money well spent. It'll be interesting to see if it's well spent, but it's definitely an interesting move from Amazon. I think it has broad implications for their LEO constellation and their broader market offerings, and again, kind of the roadmap towards TerraWave and their orbital data center intentions.
Yeah, I think the key thing that you shared that I want to highlight is the fact that this opens another avenue for revenue generation, assuming that they effectively lose their spectrum rights. So, if the FCC doesn't want to play ball with them, as it certainly looks like that is the case, this is what keeps the Amazon LEO project that they've been working on from being a complete write-off and being a total loss. This is how they're able to continue generating some revenue and to get something out of it. To your point, they are very much sort of scaling forward, and they are very much looking at how they're able to build this into their orbital data center play with TerraWave and others, and also how they're able to continue to integrate sort of with the Amazon Web Service offering that they have, which is one of the few differentiators that they have from SpaceX that nobody else really has elsewhere. Like this, being able to plug into Amazon Web Services directly from the satellite and from the hardware layer is not something that anybody else really has access to.
And I think the funny thing that I'm waiting to see is SpaceX has been fighting them in the FCC about their license extension because they want that 2-year license extension. And SpaceX is like, that's not fair. You wouldn't have given that to us. But now if Amazon's poised to like kind of come into their territory with D2D, I wouldn't be surprised if SpaceX suddenly goes quiet on the contest.
No, maybe it's fine. Maybe we let them. Maybe we give them the extension and they stay out of D2D. Why don't you guys do that? Yeah, that'll be funny. I mean, it's good to see multiple players now effectively trying to compete toe to toe at this layer. I mean, a duopolistic market is still way less favorable to the end consumer than a truly competitive market, but it is a massive improvement over an explicitly monopolistic market. So, going from one provider to two doesn't solve everything, but it is still a step in the right direction. Something that I'm excited to share is that Rocket Lab has finally acquired Mynaric officially. It is a $153 million aggregate value between cash and shares. This includes roughly 2.3 million shares of Rocket Lab common stock. And they have effectively been growing their technical moat, like we spoke about earlier. So with the announcement of their Gauss thruster and the formal and official acquisition of Mynaric, they have continued to grow out the capabilities that they're able to offer in-house and the capabilities that they will sort of continue to sell and extract rent from other players in the space, giving them a sustained competitive advantage in the market. So Rocket Lab's vertical integration and consolidation strategy continues to benefit and work well for them. I fully expect this acquisition to play out in a favorable way. And it really makes me wonder why Rheinmetall didn't actually go through with it, why Rheinmetall didn't pull the trigger and find a way to keep Mynaric in Germany. whether or not this was sort of a conscious choice of like, oh, actually, we don't want this or this optical laser capability, we don't want this ISL capability, or whether it was more of like a, well, we've been able to sort of take a look at it and the lawyers can't sort of find a way to justify us doing this. Whether it was more of a business case rejection or more of sort of a bureaucratic and red tape rejection, I'd be super curious to learn more about that because this acquisition got held up for so darn long. But congratulations to everybody involved, and especially to the folks at Binaric for continuing to execute and succeed with all of that smoke and all of those clouds hanging overhead. Great job to everybody there.
Yeah, not much to add at this point. We've talked it to death. It's been a very long, drawn-out acquisition, but congratulations to both teams.
Yeah, let's bury the horse and move on. IonQ has awarded, IonQ was awarded DARPA's HARC contract, so the Heterogeneous Architectures for Quantum program has selected IonQ to develop architectures for networked quantum computers to conduct interqubit communication. The approach focuses on IonQ's quantum memories, which are fabricated out of synthetic diamond and represent the core technology underpinning their quantum chips. Hopefully, we'll be able to chat with IonQ soon to better understand the sort of end-to-end quantum computing solutions that they're building towards and providing. But this is another positive signal, another proof of concept that there is demand for the products that they're offering, and that their vision is potentially a little bit early, but that they are leading the way.
That's what I was like. Do you really see it as like a great signal? Like, I mean, I love seeing DARPA projects, and any funding is good funding, but it almost to me is not a great signal that it's DARPA investing, because that's usually like really advanced technology. Whereas IonQ is a public quantum company that's tried to make it clear that like they're open for business, like quantum is now. This seems to kind of not contradict it, but it's not the strongest signal that their product offering is mature enough for like a commercial market.
Well, I think the fact that they got what amounts to an R&D contract from DARPA to put a pin on what you're saying. I mean, I think that the fact that they won an R&D contract from DARPA is net a positive signal. To your point, it's certainly not a IDIQ. It's certainly not a TACPhi or a StratPhi. It's certainly not a program of record or some of the other contract vehicles that we see that are much stronger signals. But the fact that IonQ is already doing this, in my mind, indicates that their product offerings are not actually that early. It's just like, how do I put this? It's not that
early.
Yeah, it's not that the products are immature. It's that the market is immature. So like they can meet the needs that are there. Is sort of my takeaway from this. Then like the customers just haven't yet caught up to what the availability is.
Yeah.
So, but to your point, that's still very much a risk. So hopefully things work out for IonQ in the next couple of years here. But I would remain optimistic that they will. I would remain optimistic that security and defense purposes will be able to find use cases, be able to find reasons to acquire and incorporate their capability stack into their communication and into their hardware stacks themselves.
Yeah, and then this is a good signal for that, because this is like a fully quantum stack, which I haven't seen anywhere. Like people keep integrating pieces of quantum, so yeah, I'm really excited for it. It's just I want this to happen sooner than later, and hopefully this goes a long way to that.
GomSpace has been awarded a €5.5 million contract from Unseen Labs. This is a follow-on order from a contract that they originally signed with Unseen Labs back in December of 2024. And this follow-on delivery of microsats will be expected no later than sort of the end of 2027. GomSpace has signed, I believe, this marks the 5th contract over the last 2 years that they've gotten for their microsat products and capabilities, which is all positive and good signals and all good progress out of the company. So congratulations to them. we'll have to see how well they're able to execute on it, but no reason to expect that they wouldn't be able to follow through. Planet IQ has received a $15 million U.S. Air Force StratFi. This is intended to enhance satellite-based weather data over the next 4 years. The contract also includes funding for the development of new data integration and insight methods, effectively trying to streamline the process of collecting, assimilating, and analyzing the weather data for more actionable intelligence. One of the big trends was that a lot of the NOAA and Earth observation satellites specifically designed to capture weather data have been decommissioned and haven't been replenished or replaced, and so there is a definite gap in the market for this type of information and intelligence. And it's good to see that gap is being met, even though it's coming from a very different source rather than NOAA and rather than from the sort of science side of things. It's coming from the Air Force for security purposes, but still good to see that information and that data is able to be collected and that gap is filled.
Yeah, hopefully government funding allows Planet IQ to also provide commercial weather data. Because to your point, like there are defense implications for good weather knowledge, but there's also just general need for more weather data.
Hawkeye 360 has won a NASA contract for low Earth orbit RF radio frequency interference study. The RFIQ data product that Hawkeye offers to NASA will help them monitor and observe spectrum usage. So the ultimate goal of this is to be able to try and, in so many words, sort of regulate and police the use of spectrum and encourage and standardize safe, responsible space-based communication practices.
Yeah, this is fitting in with a growing trend for the need for like rethinking how spectrum is managed. I forget the name of the company, but a couple of weeks ago we announced some company that got a lot of funding to kind of introduce AI into spectrum licensing.
Yeah, managing AI mapping and tracking of it. Yes.
Yeah, so it's great to see some money being put behind modernizing the spectrum licensing system as we've talked about the spectrum war kind of growing. The need to have better implementation and better regulation of this is, I'm sure it will be welcomed by most of the space industry.
Absolutely. X Energy is targeting an $800+ million raise with an IPO. They're targeting a valuation of over $7.5 billion, looking at raising just around $814 million by offering just about 42 million shares priced between 16 and 19 US. The underwriters of this offering will then be offered the right to purchase an additional, I believe, 6.5 million shares of not common stock, but of Class A stock options. So they are hitting the market on the back of the stated goals and priorities of getting nuclear power in space and getting nuclear reactors and nuclear power presence on the moon as well. So X Energy is effectively striking while the iron is hot. They're hitting the market and intentionally doing so. The CEO and other stakeholders within the company have explicitly said that a big part of the reason why they're pursuing the IPO now is because the window is open, and in so many words that it is opportunistic. So this is another major IPO announcement that we're seeing, almost $10 billion potentially going public here. So another major liquidation event for the space industry.
And it really goes to the trend we've been talking about, which is that Cam Ghaffarian always wins. This is like his 5th win this year for major money. Like the Intuitive Machines got awarded under the Andromeda last week. Axiom Space got the 100 million from Hungary in December. They had like a couple of funding rounds between all his companies. Like this is great, not just because it's just another sign that Cam Ghaffarian knows how to raise money, but also because some of that money will be flowing back to his investment firm IBX, and hopefully then back into the space industry and fuel even more growth through a person that seems just very prescient in how the space industry needs to grow.
Global X Management has launched their own ETF, Orbex, ORBX. It has a 0.5% management fee and is a play to focus purely on the space economy. So only companies that earn over 50% of their revenues from the space industry can be included. And effectively, what this means is that rather than needing to track space companies publicly, rather than needing to create your own sort of space company index, you're able to just buy Orbex. You're able to buy this on the stock market, which itself is a passive fund that does that on its own. So if you want pure exposure to the space economy, pure exposure to the space market, there's now a market amalgamator that does exactly that. And what does this mean? It means the secret is out. Space is no longer, quote, going to be a big investment opportunity. It's publicly available. The masses can now easily access space on whatever sort of investment or trading platform that they want. It represents a pretty sizable shift for the space industry. Finally, SBIRs are back, baby. We are reauthorized. So there are a couple of strings attached with the SBIR reauthorization, though they don't majorly impact the functionality or the operations of how this is conducted. Fundamentally, the diligence process for companies applying for SBIRs has been extended. There's now more of a prioritization and more of a consideration and diligence going into the security implications of what's going on. In so many words, you want to make sure that the companies that are applying for and winning SBIRs don't have money coming from adversarial or quote unquote dirty money, dirty sources coming in. And additionally, the other sort of major talking point here is that the SBIR reauthorization is focused on trying to reduce and trying to sort of minimize the impact of what are colloquially called SBIR mills. So there's companies that go out there that, they make their living by filling out these SBIRs without actually delivering a whole lot of product. So it's a lot of phase ones, it's a lot of initial things, a lot of initial designs, but there's very little sort of delivered and very little to see on that outside of some of the initial research and analysis. And there's a decided focus to reallocate funds to companies that are able to actually deliver product and deliver capabilities.
Yeah, this is great to hear. The SBIRs have been on pause for a while pending congressional reauthorization, but I know there was some talk about them not coming back at all, which would have been a huge detriment to the industry, particularly small space companies, which, as we see a lot of consolidation in the space industry towards big space companies, it's unfortunate to see that small ones are struggling to compete. We don't want another like defense prime situation with stagnating, space technology. So I really think SBIRs are one of the best tools in the American toolbox to grow our space capabilities as a country. And I think it's one of the key tools we need to compete with China as they're rapidly expanding their space technology. So a lot of these capabilities like space domain awareness, RPO, laser intersatellite links come out of SBIRs. I think this is necessary to keep us growing and keep adding new technology to the space capability. So for tech advances this week, we have some really neat ones. Aethero was awarded a $10.2 million NASA contract for a solar sail. And this is a bit different than our traditional solar sails. Traditionally, a solar sail is a large mylar canvas that captures solar wind and moves satellites through space without any need for fuel, which is great for some applications. Usually smaller satellites can implement this. But there's, restrictions on the mass to carry such a large sail. In order to get enough thrust, it needs to be really big. So just carrying that much mass in mylar. And then the deployment can be kind of tricky, much like deploying a parachute on Earth is not 100%. Deploying anything in space is not guaranteed either. That same thing is going to apply for Aethero solar sail, but they can operate at smaller sizes because this solar sail actually generates thrust from a laser that is sent from the Earth. There's been designs for this for decades. This is probably a Cold War idea that's been floating around for a while. So it's really cool to see a company actually pursuing it. As we talked about, there's been a growth in laser ground to space communication. There's also been a growth in directed energy weapons that can do lasers from the Earth and from air and space as well. So I think off the back of this growth in laser technology, this idea is being revisited, and $10 million, I really expect to see something fly from this amount of funding. And that'll be great to see, because fuel-free thrust is rare, and none has really managed to manifest, but I like to see it attempted nevertheless. SB Quantum has closed a $4 million seed round. This is to develop their Diamond Quantum Magnetometer. This is particularly cool because we talked about them launching their magnetometer on a Spire satellite a couple months ago. So this seems to indicate that test went well. It's a really cool technology. It has much higher accuracy than traditional magnetometers. You don't have any of the drift or offsets or biases that you see with traditional electromechanical magnetometers. This quantum diamond magnetometer uses nitrogen suspended in diamonds and a laser to trigger a sort of quantum effect that gives you orientation data, which would be huge for lots of satellite applications. It's a pretty sizable component, about the size of a quart of milk. So not for every application, but for high accuracy applications like missile tracking or communication systems or some RPO capabilities, having technology like this is really, really neat to see. The recent Falcon 9 launch carried a Cygnus XL spacecraft to the ISS, which was cool on its own because this is actually like a Cygnus XXL. We talked about the Cygnus XL going up late last year where they increased their cargo capacity. This is yet another increase their cargo capacity. So great to see. The part that I wanted to highlight here is that this mission carried an update to the Cold Atom Lab on board the ISS. So this is a quantum physics module update to the Cold Atom Lab. This is neat because that means they're still running tests of that particular laboratory on board the ISS, which is a really neat lab that they have because it manages to chill atom clouds down to 1/10 billionth of a degree above absolute zero, which is a lot easier, still not easy to do in space.
Is that in centigrade or Fahrenheit? Important clarification.
I always call it in kelvins, but it's real cold. It's like the other side of my pillow in a cold winter night. So this is really neat because chilling atoms to that cold allows them to actually observe atomic wave functions. So this gives us insights into quantum level physics and allows us to actually learn more about dark matter and some of the more interesting components of quantum physics. Lastly, a couple of announcements from NASA, including a search for the TDRS replacement. So this is the data relay and tracking system that NASA flies. It's a set of 3 satellites in geosynchronous orbit. They operate in tandem to provide tracking and data relay services to satellites that are below geo. So NASA uses it primarily for NASA satellites as a data relay service, but these are pretty old satellites, a couple decades at this point. So they're looking for a replacement for this, and it seems like just the right time to do it, as a data relay system is, nothing new, but in these past year or two, it's seen huge advances. I mean, we talk about mega constellations all the time. We're talking about laser optical intersatellite links now. There are many improvements that could be made to a system that old. And it's great to see that NASA is tapping the commercial industry to try to find not just a replacement, but an upgrade to that system. And lastly, NASA Force has been announced. This is an interesting pivot for NASA. There was a announcement, or there was a statement by Isaacman, the head of NASA, had a month or two ago about how they're lacking some of the technical expertise they need for NASA to scale to the ambitions that he's setting out. A lot of that I'm sure can be attributed to the layoffs that we saw last year through the defunding of NASA. Yeah. But now they're looking to kind of re-bolster that skill level. And they're doing it in a different and sort of interesting way. They're using the Office of Personnel Management to get more technically talented people into NASA through what they call the Tech Force for OPM, but the expansion in NASA makes it the NASA Force. So these are 1 to 2 year contracts for anybody deemed technically competent enough at certain things that NASA needs for them to come in and help move along different programs and advance NASA's technology, with the potential for an extension upon those contracts. So really interesting approach NASA's taking here, but it opens up a door for anybody that's been interested in NASA to try to get their way in.
Well, that is a wrap for the week's recap of the space industry. We hope you enjoyed the episode. As always, please drop us a comment, check out our socials, and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Substack, or wherever you're receiving this signal. Until next time, this is Paul Mayer and Harrison Lambert, signing off for now.